Okay, hello everyone. I will go ahead and get us started now. I see attendees are starting to trickle in. So I'll give a brief introduction. So I'll start off by introducing myself. My name is Dale Bingham and I'm the Visitor Services Coordinator for the Chumash Indian Museum in Thousand Oaks. I've had the pleasure of coordinating and planning the museum's speaker series program for the last few years now. And it's always a joy to have the speaker present their knowledge and experience to all of our attendees physically at the museum. So this year it's a little different, obviously. We have all faced challenges due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and our small museum is no different. Back in March, we actually closed our doors to the public and we postponed all of our planned events for the year, and we had to reconfigure how we would go about engaging with the public in this new virtual climate. So fortunately, we were incredibly lucky to receive a CARE grant through the National Endowment for the Humanities, and that has helped us fund our new virtual programs, including this one. Tonight's presentation was funded through the CARE grant, and we will be offering 3 more presentations through December, 1 a month. So please be on the lookout for those on our social media, on our website, and through email newsletters. We'll have flyers and information up on there of how to RSVP for those events. After December, we would like to continue to bring these important topics and voices to all who are interested through our speaker series program. But unfortunately, due to the funding issues brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic and the museum closure, we were struggling to find the funds to continue with our speaker series events for the new year. So that's why small donations from people like all of you guys are so important, and they really do mean the world to us. Even a $5 donation can really help us raise the funds to continue this program and to book more speakers. Supporting our small museum gift shop's another great way to help us raise the funds. So please consider purchasing a book, cards, masks, t-shirts. We have many other gifts in our new online shop, and I'm going to post the donation information in the chat box below, and all of this information can also be found on our website at chumashmuseum.org. So now on to tonight's presentation. For all of you tuning in, we will have a Q&A session after her presentation. So as we continue on, please feel free to submit your questions or comments. If you're using Zoom, please type your questions into the chat box. And then if you're joining us via Facebook Live, please feel free to comment, and we will make sure that those comments make their way onto our Zoom box for Megan to see. And now for our speaker. We at the museum are very excited to have Megan Dorame present tonight. Megan is a Tongva poet who lives and writes in Santa Ana, California. She holds a BA in anthropology from the University of Oklahoma and works to reclaim and revitalize the Tongva language. Megan is a 2020 PEN Emerging Voices Fellow, and her work has appeared in The Ear, Dryland, and The Offing, among others. Megan is working on a collection right now of poems inspired by the complicated history of her people. And so now I'll hand it over to our presenter, Megan.
Thank you, Dale. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to introduce myself in the Tongva language. Ni ha Netwanyane Megan Dorame None Tongvet Honukvitam Kime Washna Momwa Michepar Aweshkoneha Ekwaneha. Hi, my name is Megan Dorame. I am Tongva. So we are indigenous to the Los Angeles basin. My ancestors are from the village Washna, which is where Playa Vista is in West LA, right near the Bayona wetlands. I am so happy to be here. Thank you so much to Dale for inviting me to speak, and thank you to Chumash Indian Museum for hosting. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. So I wanted to give you an agenda. I know that we all have been Zooming a lot lately, and so I just wanted you to have an idea of where this is going. I'm going to start by just reading a few of my poems that I use the Tongva language in, and then I'm going to give you a brief background on the Tongva language so you have just an idea of where I'm coming from. And then I'm going to share a little about my writing process and how I've used the Tongva language in some of my work. And then I wanted us to be able to look at a few poems by other poets just to see what they're up to, see how they're using their Indigenous languages in their work. And then I wanted to give you a few entry points for starting to write poems in your Indigenous language. Hopefully those generative exercises will help you get started. And then there will be a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions as I'm going along, you can type them in the Q&A box and I'll do my best to answer the questions at the end. Okay, so I'm gonna start by reading a few of my poems. This first poem was written 100% in the Tongva language. Later on, I'm going to share with you the framework that I use to write this particular poem. And so hopefully by the end of this, you'll have also a framework for writing a poem 100% in your Indigenous language. So this is called Yukne, I Carry. Yukne, Yaukne, Chaitok, Koi, Ne En, Yaukne, Apushpero, Nomungunga, Tang Komokne, Barokne, Wish Menokne, Keota, Keot, Ahau Sakwaach, Chokukeachne, Je Ea Kion. I carry. I have my blood and my bones. I have my weak knees. I walk. I come upon water. I want high tide. Whale mourns. I carry her song on my back. Okay. And so this next poem is called Call Me Hukat, and I only use one Tongva word in this poem, and it's in the title. I think when I wrote this poem, I had just made a clapper stick out of an elderberry branch, and I was just in awe of this plant and how much it gives us, and so I just wanted to sort of meditate on what this plant means to me. And so this is called Call Me Hukat. Part 1. I am elderberry branch, cut from shrub and cord, all of my pith a pile on the pavement. Lurching toward bare earth, I break my teeth in my occlusion with concrete. I gum on that which suffocates homeland. In part 2, I am elderberry branch ablaze. I will not be raised to ruin. I cauterize, for I am adapted to fire. From bed of soil, I pop shoots from root crown. I rise because I have to. All right, and then this next poem. So this poem has a couple of Tongva words in it. The first one is we'ashar, which is the Tongva word for the oak tree, specifically the coast live oak. And chavot is the word for fire. I also use the word quad and quaquad. So quad is for acorn, and quaquad is acorns plural. And let's see, I can't really, I'm gonna X out of this really good. Okay, so I can see. Okay. And so, okay, when I wrote this poem, I wrote this before the pandemic, and I talk about gathering, like people gathering together to like sing and share culture, but obviously we can't do that yet. So just know that. And then when I wrote this, I had just read the poem, She Had Some Horses by Joy Harjo. And if you're familiar with this poem, like that refrain of she had some horses is repeated over and over. And it's very song-like. So I wanted to sort of bring a song-like refrain into some of my work. So I was experimenting with that in this poem, and I used the refrain "We ashar chavot," so oak light, a few times in here. So I'll go ahead and read this for you. Instructions for finding your way back. Instructions for finding your way forward. Instructions for finding Los Angeles. Instructions for finding her. Instructions for finding We ashar chavot. Observe young oaks holding the slope over the 101. Observe as they lean their length over the red and white light stream. Observe the laser of traffic lacerating the east side from downtown. No, the leaves of the oak are convex for maximum consumption of sunlight. No, light springs from leaf to leaf so that collectively the canopy can grow. And now consider the night. Consider the journey of blue glow. Consider the impression of moonlight on oak leaves, countless spotlights rebounding back into black. Consider seeking the place where the sky begins. And realize dust motes will move into focus. Realize the gaze will rise to the stars. Realize the Milky Way is a village of ancestors. Remember them. And concede there is still so much we will never know about the sky or the light from the stars. Concede there is still so much we will never know about the ones who came before us. Honor them anyway. Hear the dust motes colliding, hear the ting of metal chimes, hear breath through the hollow of bird bone, hear short vowels stretched out, hear the volume as it rises and falls, hear the swirl of sounds bouncing off of concrete walls, hear the revolution, and sing We ashar chavot, sing We ashar chavot, louder We ashar chavot, louder. Feel the rhythm of blood song reverberate through the body. Feel the heart beam. Sing We ashar chavot, sing We ashar chavot, repeat, gather, sing, repeat, gather, sing, repeat, and listen. Wait for the dust motes to float, flickering like faulty wire, and wait for photosynthesis. Trust the dust motes are pulsars, passed through worlds and words and song. Trust the song will her ascension. Trust the flow of the cars will cease. Note friction smoke to nose. Note wood to pavement scrape wine. Note the rumble crack through the concrete. See her emergence. See dust motes as beacons, beckoning her upwards to sprout. See memory roused from the ground. See 500 years of branches expanding, spectral, spiraling into space. See yellow pendulous tufts of oak flower. See her inflorescence alight and swelling into acorn. Acknowledge the density of her mast and wait for acorn rain. Recognize its sound. Guar, quack, guar, guar, quack, guar, guar, quack, guar. And now we fill up our pockets with our futures. All right, so that's all of my work that I'm going to share with you tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Tongva language. So the last fluent speaker of the Tongva language died over 100 years ago. We lost our language. I usually say it was sleeping, but as 3 waves of colonization took over, the language went away over a period of 150 years. Very few words have been passed on through families, but there are rare cases where words have carried through lineages to the present. That's unfortunately not the case with my family. So the grammar book and the dictionary that we have today was assembled without living speakers. They were written by a linguist. Her name's Pamela Monroe. She's a UCLA professor. She based the dictionary and the grammar on the notes of J.P. Harrington, who was a linguist and an ethnologist. Also C. Hart Merriam, who was a naturalist and an ethnologist. And I think there were a few notes in there from Alfred Kroeber, who was an anthropologist. This photo that I have up here is a photo of Mrs. Rose Meyer. She was born at San Gabriel, and I believe this photo was taken around 1903. She was a Tongva woman, and she was one of the people C. Hart Merriam talked to when he was recording some of the Tongva language. Most of the archive that was left of the Tongva language was recorded between 1900 and 1920 or so. And so in more recent years, Pamela Monroe, she sorted through all these archives and like brought together all these fragments and really reassembled the language for us. Without the work that she's done, the momentum that we're gaining in terms of reclaiming and revitalizing our language would not be possible today. So we're really grateful for the work that she's done. That said, like what we do have left of the language is very fragmented, and there are lots of holes that only a native speaker could fill. There's a lot that we will never know. A lot of the cultural context is missing, so it's more just direct Tongva to English translation. And I'm always cognizant of the fact that what remains of the Tongva language today is what these non-native, white ethnographers deemed important. So, in my imagination, these men had a narrow scope of what they wanted to know about us and record. And I always just wonder what else there was, what expanse of knowledge and worldview was not considered by them to be recorded. But that's just one of those things that we'll never know. And it's taken me a long time to not feel perpetually heartbroken about that. But I think, using what we do have has been really healing for me in that respect. And so, like, probably the main reason why I write in the Tongva language is because I believe that, using the language and speaking it out loud breathes life into it. And I write mostly in English. English is my first language. But I don't know if you all know of Natalie Diaz, but she's a Mojave poet. Her newest book is called Post-Colonial Love Poem. If you haven't read it yet, I would encourage you to check it out. But she has said something to the effect of, when Native people write, that we're using the white space that once silenced us. So that's always in the back of my head too when I'm writing. So much of what has been written about us was not written by us. And so I write against that historical silencing by choosing to use the Tongva language in my work. And I see it as an act of both resistance and resilience. And maybe even most importantly for me, writing in the Tongva language just brings me a great deal of joy. It makes me so happy. And that said, like, I'm a beginner when it comes to learning Tongva. I'm still learning. I consider myself a beginner poet. I still have a lot to learn. But I just thought I could share with you, what's worked for me and what's been fun for me. So if there are some of you that want to start writing poems in your Indigenous language but don't know where to start, or if it feels daunting, there are lots of easy ways to get started. And I would just say, just remember that you don't have to be fluent in your language to make something beautiful. And I've found also that just the act of trying to write in Tongva language, it really does encourage me to learn and gain a deeper understanding of the language, because if I have something that I want to say, I'm going to figure out how to say it. And for me, it's a lot more fun, digging through the grammar book and trying to figure out things that way than just studying the lessons. That's not very easy for me. So it's just a fun way for me to learn my language too. And so let's see. I'm going to stop sharing this screen and then see if I can share the screen. Okay. So right here, this is one of the first pieces that I wrote using the Tongva language. It's called Papavitam, Water People. It's kind of a cross genre piece, I would say. I guess I learned from other people how to interpret it. For me, I guess it's more of an epic poem type of story. But in this piece, we follow the journey of a water spirit as she makes her way through Tovangar, which is the Tongva world or the Tongva homeland. So she journeys from a spring of water where she was born and then makes her way to the sea. So in this piece in particular, I counter Tongva loss and erasure by approaching the page as a space where I'm able to take back the land that was stolen from us. I weave together several strands of Tongva oral histories that tell of a devastating flood. And in the merging of these histories, the lessons that they teach are braided into a modern day story. So in my reimagined version of the story, a flood overtakes Los Angeles basin, resetting the imbalances that have occurred as a result of colonization. So in terms of using the Tongva language in this piece, I wanted to give agency to the land and to all of our relatives, so water, plants, animals, and I wanted to animate them and make them characters. And so I did this by referring to them by their Tongva names. And by giving voice to what, this was published in the offing, so this publishes a lot of different things, but I wanted to give voice to what non-Native folks may refer to as inanimate objects, just to share the Tongva worldview, where we're in relation with all beings, that we treat them as relatives. And so if you look, so some of the characters here, so I have Shishever, the sycamores, I have Tamet, sun, Chichinuam, the pollywogs. You get the idea. And so I think with this piece also, the Tongva dictionary and grammar are not readily available. They are copyrighted and, they can't be purchased on Amazon. They're kind of difficult to come by. And so access to the Tongva language is really important to me. And that's also part of the reason, why I try to put the language out there. I think mostly for my community. I know this is just a few words to share, but I just hoped that it would, help my own community maybe learn a few new words. I think part of my intention also was to maybe get non-native folks to get used to seeing our Indigenous languages and reading these words and starting to feel comfortable with them. And so I'm going to stop sharing this screen and go back to my PowerPoint. Just a minute here. Okay. And so I thought now we could look at a few poems written by other poets. And I'm going to go ahead. Okay, let me press play on here. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and read this. Wow, it's okay. And then, okay, so I am going to do my best to pronounce these words. This is in the Navajo language. I apologize sincerely if I'm not pronouncing this perfectly, but this poem is one of my favorites. This is written by Esther Balin, and it's in this book, her newest book. It's called Of Cartography. You can see the photo of it there. And this is called Doltalish. Christmas Day, we sat at the ocean along the Southern California coast. The loud voices in the waves made our own anger seem ridiculous, a tantrum. Our tears, like breakers of unsaid sayings, an orbital crash pounding surface into sandstone, a mortar and pestle, rhythmic as each change in tide. How fascinating the light glows, crystal in places, deep with envy in others, and still dark with mystery like the language within, releasing true colors or maybe not. Totolij, Navajo language where blue is green and green is blue, turning a color into living water, an ocean or perhaps union. Totolij, like the churning waters. Totolij, like the churning waters. So, from what I understand, Totolij, and I may be wrong here, but Totolij references the color turquoise, which is not quite green or blue, but it can also mean both. And so this really resonated with me because in Tongva language too, the word for blue and green are the same. And I just love this contrast in worldview, I guess. My first language, like I said, is English, where there is a difference between green and blue, and just the act of shifting your perspective to recognize green and blue as being the same is so beautiful to me. And I love that in this poem, like it takes this moment at the beach and turns it into this meditation on color and language. And so I love the way the poet is thinking about this one word. And I think that this is something that, we can bring to our work too, is just thinking about how certain words translate or do not translate, and just thinking about how those words interact with our everyday life. And those are always things to write about. And so this one is by Hyde Eardrick. Just a moment. My computer is not happy right now. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to read this one. And this is another one where, it uses one Indigenous word, and the word is also in the title. And this book, by the way, The Mother's Tongue, is probably one of my favorite poetry books. Okay, so this is called Mindy Moyeg, Dandelions, for Lincoln. I thought, why cut them out? A weed so cheery on the boulevard, first thing to bloom in spring. But the retired emperor of the neighborhood crossed the street, shoved a dandelion fork in my hand, asked, did I know what it was? Demanded I use it. Who can blame him? His whole generation groomed lawns next to godly clean. Chemicals and edger rentals, the American dream. My weeds might invade, take each lawn year by year until all this spring cheer would nod up and down the avenue. That would not do. Not a fair fight, since the species long ago arrived, took over, became so valued by the people here that they named it for their elders, Mindy Moya, old woman, Ojibwe call them. White-headed in a day, yet full of seedy vigor, most fertile once they've aged. When young, the Mindy Moya helps new mothers get their milk. Notched leaves bleed white sap, a bitter tonic that perhaps works as a suggestive cure. Or is there science here? So many of the old medicines have come to signify. I might have tried it had I been desperate to get a baby on my breast. Nothing could taste worse than hungry infant cries, but no, my son sated in a basket nearby where I dug the milky roots, all the while apologizing to the strong old ones, asking that they give up their hold on the place. And though I piled them high, blistered my hand where the fork fit, next year they returned. Our young neighbors made a pact to just let them go, and the old ladies nod now, empresses of the avenue. So yeah, this I just love this. Like the previous poem, like I said, it just has one word in it, but it's sparked by, this moment where the neighbor hands her the weeding instrument. And then it becomes this examination of this Ojibwe word, what it means, where it comes from, where it fits into the world today, and, what it means to the speaker. Okay, and this next poem is actually a lot different. This is by Joan Kane, who is Inupiaq. And I think I really like this one because it doesn't give us it doesn't hand us the translation. And I'm gonna read this one out loud. Okay. White Alice. 1. Sosach Sasak, 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 sasak. 2. Clack the wheels on the wall as they click the rock of ore. For distant brawls, bells clang and roll and strike within her sawdust clocks. So I had to look up what sasak meant, and it means clocks, and there is reference to clocks at the end of the poem. But I was just so struck by the form. Sasak, the repetition of sasak, sasak, it almost sounds like a ticking clock. And then it's arranged on the page in such a way where it almost looks like a forward pointing arrow. Yeah, it's so cool. I wonder how we could, in our own poems, apply a similar device, like using just one word, a shape, or maybe a sound. How can we use this repetition and arrange the repetition in such a way where it creates meaning or emotion? Okay, so I have some entry points, and everyone's writing process is different. For me, I rarely sit down and write a complete poem in one sitting. Instead, I'll often have these disparate pieces, words, ideas, phrases, imagery. And when I sit down to write a poem, I'm just weaving these different things together. And it takes many drafts for them to ultimately become a poem. And so one exercise that really works for me, that helps me have a regular writing process, is just making a list of like all the Tongva words that I love. This is our dictionary. And so I'll just go through here, and sometimes I'll highlight words, or maybe I'll just add them to this really long list that I already have. And every time I go to the dictionary, it's like I find something new. It's like kind of a little treasure chest for me. But go through like the vocabulary list you have and make a list of words you're drawn to. So maybe it's the image, like it's striking. Maybe the sounds, like something about the sound is you're drawn to that. And like the poem, a couple of the poems we read earlier, like maybe the translation or the lack of translation is weird, and it's like something that you want to explore. I think other words to look for are like words where just the slightest alteration in pronunciation, or maybe just like letter, can affect the whole meaning of the poem. Those are really interesting words to use. And so I just take regular note cards, and I'll put the word on each word that's on my list on the note card. And then the back is blank. And so because I'm a beginner in Tongva language, like I make 2 note cards with the same word. One for me to free write in English, and then the other I'll go back and try to write words in Tongva language. I don't know if any of you have a meditation practice, but for me, it's really helpful to generate material by just sitting in silence for a few minutes and then writing for a few minutes. It's helpful to set a timer and just force yourself to write. And I like the sitting in stillness exercise because it makes it easier to sort of turn off the inner critic, and I think that's really important. And then after I do that, I'll have to like go back and really like be in the mindset of focusing to try to write in Tongva because it's pretty hard for me. So yeah, that's why I have 2 cards. And that's been really helpful for me. And then another exercise that's really fun is to experiment with alphabet sounds from your language. You know, each Indigenous language has its own orthography or alphabet system. So right here, I started with A. I kind of call this exercise like alliteration on steroids. Alliteration is where the first letter of each word is the same in a phrase or sentence. But as you can see here, like for the first one, the A or ah sound, I tried to use it as many times as I could, but I also had it at the end of words or in the middle of words. I think this one's also fun too. If you come up with some phrases, these are great ways to share the language and like the language sounds with kids. I like the one that I have for the E word. Ehe, ekwareha, eyen mokre, erachpo, itar, hetkomok, heteko, hemuvet. Yes, we are here. We are laughing. Old man coyote, he jumps above a little hill. So yeah, these are fun to use with kids if you come up with maybe silly things to say. Such a great way to help them learn the language too. And even just memorize words yourself. Okay, so tonkas. Tonkas are a Japanese form. One of my favorite forms to play with. Traditionally, they are 5 lines, and the syllable count for each line is 5, 7, 5, 7, 7. This form sort of creates this short little package or puzzle that you're trying to fit words into to create, you know, some sort of meaning. And weirdly for me, the constraint of having like a certain number of syllables in each line is kind of freeing. It does feel like a puzzle to me, and it doesn't feel too daunting because it's only 5 lines. I do realize that, you know, some of our Indigenous languages have longer words with more than 5 syllables, or there's, you know, polysynthetic languages where you have all these word parts that you're just adding on to make this really long sentence word. And I would say if your language is like that, like just like double the 5, 7, 5, 7, 7 syllable count form, or triple it if you need to. I was pretty skeptical about tonkas, but earlier this summer, I was just having a really hard time writing with everything going on. And my mentor, Vanessa Angelica Villarreal, she suggested just write some tonkas, and I was like, okay. And then I ended up writing all of these tonkas. Yeah, I was really surprised. I always, you know, heard people say that like form is having like a constraint of form is freeing, and I never really believed it until I started writing tonkas. And I think these are really fun ones to do with our Indigenous languages because it is only 5 lines. And then imitation poems. I learned the most about poetry by reading poetry. I obviously read poets and enjoy reading poets who write in their Indigenous languages. So if I come across a poem that I just absolutely love and can't stop thinking about, then I'll try to write an imitation poem. They're really fun to play around with, but because, you know, we're using somebody else's ideas and in a way sort of copying them, these aren't really publishable. Anyway, either way, they're a really great tool for learning. And it's also a fun way to just try to challenge yourself and study your language and deepen your understanding of it. This one, I was watching a video of a talk that Layli Long Soldier gave for Institute of American Indian Arts, and she had this series of poems called Quilts, and I think it was actually an art installation. And from what I understand, the form, it's kind of diamond shaped. It's like emulating like a quilt, a patch of quilt, and I think this exhibit had something to do with star quilts, which are meaningful to Lakota culture. And by the way, if you don't know Layli Long Soldier, her book Whereas is amazing. I would encourage you to check it out. Yeah, so I was so struck by this poem that I wanted to try to emulate it. And so I actually first wrote it in Tongva language and then translated it to English, which is usually backwards from how I work. And then I just put it in a similar form with a dark background and white words. And so the last entry point that I have to share with you is Layli Long Soldier. Again, this is her framework. And this is how to write a poem 100% in your language. I learned this from her, and this is the framework that I used for the first poem that I read to you guys of my own. And so the constraints are, you write 4 statements. They're all in present tense. You use first person I. And so you just have to fill in these statements in your Indigenous language. So I have a body part, and then you fill in 4 different body parts that you have. And then you have 4 I do not have statements, and you can fill in daily objects, clothing, or tools. And then you have I want statements, and these are abstract terms. So I want happiness, I want security. And then you have I carry, so natural elements, animals, and plants. And so from there, you have 16 statements to choose from. And you can rearrange them however you like. You can, because it's your poem, you can do whatever you want. So you don't have to use all of them. You can add other statements. That's what I did with mine. But this like simple exercise can really help you create something really beautiful. And even as a beginner, like this is a really fun thing to do. And then we can go back really quick and look at, maybe not, oh, here we go. We can go back and look at this poem that I wrote. So I have 2 I have statements. I have an I want statement, an I carry statement, and then I added a few just random ones to tell the story that I wanted to tell here. And so my final thoughts here on writing in our Indigenous languages is, I would say it's just very important to be intentional, to always remember to handle our languages with care. Some advice I received was, try not to just use Indigenous words like ornaments that you would hang on a Christmas tree, like you're just putting them there for it to be pretty. Like, make sure that there's actual intention behind the reason why you're using them. And then I would also say, like, don't worry too much about making mistakes. I think there is beauty in making mistakes, and mistakes show that you're trying to learn. But if you do have any doubts about how you're putting your language out there into the world, like, don't be afraid to talk to people in your community, or if there's an elder or a respected member of your community to talk to. That's always important if you're feeling like you might not, there's something you shouldn't share. And then I would say, if you're thinking about publishing a poem and you're not sure about the grammar, like if there's someone that you can ask to look over it to make sure it's as correct as you can get it, like that's helpful too. And then lastly, I am a poetry editor at the online poetry journal, The Night Heron Barks. We will be accepting submissions for the winter issue in maybe a month or a month and a half. And so if you have poems like that you want us to consider to publish, I would love it if you sent us your poems. I think it's really important for everyone to get used to seeing Indigenous languages, especially in poetry. And I have my Instagram right here. If you want to follow me, I'll keep you updated with when the submission period opens up. And my email is right here too. Like, feel free to email me if you have questions, or if you want to share what you wrote or anything. If you need help, like, email me. I'm happy to help. And thank you so much. Awesh Gonecha. It's how we say thank you in Tongva language. Let me see if I can look at the questions now. Okay, I am not seeing any questions.
I think they were posted in the chat.
Oh, in the chat. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with the Q&A section, but
Okay.
the chat box.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, I see a question that says, my family has Tongva heritage, but I know nothing about our history. Do you have any resources you can suggest or share how you found out about your heritage? I think, yeah, I would say if you wrote down my email, and I can put it in the chat box, like I'm happy to share with you. There's a few resources. Off the top of my head, I'm blanking out, but like I would be so happy to send you what I know. From like my family, like it's just been a huge part of our life of knowing who we are. And, you know, my family's never left this area of LA and Orange County. We've always been here. So a lot was just passed down orally, but there are some resources that I'm happy to share with you if you want to learn more. Let's see, let me put my email in here. I don't see any other questions.
On Facebook, there's a lot of great feedback.
Oh, okay.
Not so much questions, but everyone is really inspired by your work and very happy that you're able to share with us.
Okay, I see a question on here. Hi, I teach elementary school and wonder how I can be more conscious of my Tongva unit, considering I work with 7- and 8-year-olds. Where can I get more legitimate resources that are age appropriate? Also, yeah. I think there's like there's like an LA Times article that has a really neat language feature, and it is designed for kids. I don't know a whole lot about curriculum for younger kids. I know it's something that a lot of people are in the process of trying to change. And I feel like finally, like our community is starting to have the cultural capital to start writing our own things about ourselves. And I think eventually, like there will be curriculum written by us, like from our perspective, which is, I think, the most important. But unfortunately, I feel like there aren't a lot of resources that are readily available.
We can also share some resources on our Facebook and then also send out an email. I believe I remember seeing the newspaper article that you were talking about that talked about them. And I know Julia Bogany is out there that I think she does school visits, and she definitely has.
Yeah, I know Julia Bogany and then Lázaro Arvizu. They both do that all the time. Well, when you could go into schools, and they were in schools all the time teaching kids different things about our culture.
Great question.
Okay, I have a question. Are you familiar with the origin of the word Topanga? I have found resources say it's Chumash and others say Tongva. I just moved there and want to honor the land as much as possible. I think Topanga, because it has the A-N-G-A ending, that's like a very common Tongva ending for place names. I know that area Topanga is, you know, on the border of Chumash and Tongva land. So it might be an amalgamation of both languages, because that was the reality back then. I'm sure like Tongva folks that lived around there spoke a little Chumash, and Chumash folks spoke a little Tongva. Yeah, it's just one of those overlap areas. It's probably, you know, if you live there, I would say honor both tribes.
Any other questions from Facebook? Checking if people are still writing their, oh, go ahead.
Do you develop new words? Not really. I would say, I don't know how to explain this. Sometimes there will be something that we want to say, and you know, it's because the records that we have are from 1900, so like there's no word for compute, like there would be no word for computer, and we're not just gonna make it up. There is a really interesting word, I think, for telephone, and it was like something to the effect of like wind moving through the air, or like something moving through the air. So if we have like clues to what a word could be, like maybe we have the verb but not the noun, or like we'll add those words. But in terms of adding like completely new words, no. But the cool thing is we're still like, there's still things in the archive that we have not discovered. So we're slowly digging through that too. And it's really exciting when we find something new. You mentioned that you more frequently work from English to Tongva, but have also worked from Tongva to English. Can you speak about how or why you might create one way or the other? Yeah, so like I mentioned, Tonga language is so fragmented, and you know, half the stuff I want to say from English, I just, you know, there really isn't a way to say it. And so it just depends on, I guess, what I'm trying to write about. Sometimes I'll just approach the dictionary and just try to write straight in Tongva, because like just using Tongva language off the bat is a constraint. It's like a lot of constraints. And English to Tongva, I think I started, you know, doing writing English to Tongva because I just didn't know Tongva as much or understand the grammar as much. But the more that I learn, the more I'm able to start with Tongva and then translate it to English, if that makes sense. Can you share any info for Tuvimor Rock? No, sorry. I think that's the rock off of like San Pedro or Palos Verdes or something. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm not like an expert on everything Tongva culture. I wish that I was, but I'm not. I understand there's a Tongva language learning group. Are you involved with that? I am, yeah. So Pamela Monroe, the linguist that I mentioned earlier, she teaches a class for a small group of Tongva folks. And she's probably been teaching this class for like 15 years. I've been going for the past like 3. And that's when I started, you know, that's the only reason why I could learn the language, is that I was able to go to these classes. Yeah. How many poems do you suggest for a chapbook? I don't know. It depends on, like, I feel like a full-length manuscript is like at least 60 pages. I don't know. I might be wrong. I don't know, at least 20 pages maybe. I actually have a little series that I'm working on that I'm calling the Salinity Poems, and I have maybe like 12 pages. I could probably stretch it a little, but I was thinking of maybe making a little zine or like just a skinny chapbook with that. I don't know. I'm not really the one to make the rules on the chapbook. I think you can do whatever you want. Any other questions? Oh. Is there a way to directly support you or your work? No, you can follow me on Instagram, and I would encourage you to support Chumash Indian Museum and make a donation to them. They're doing a lot of good work. I try to keep my Instagram pretty updated with things that I have going on if you want to follow my work. Where would you suggest people get started with trying to publish a poetry book? Honestly, I would say just joining. If you're active in your writing community, you get to know people, and just talking to people, you learn like what publishers you do and don't want to associate with. And I don't know, once people know you, I feel like you just have to have connections, I guess. And I'm happy to, like, if you have a manuscript that, you know, you're trying to get out there, and I'm happy to look at it and maybe pass it along to somebody that I might know. When will we have a Tongva museum or cultural center? That's a great question. I don't know. You know, we're not federally recognized, and so, you know, we don't have the means for that. And also we exist as like different tribal groups. There isn't much cohesion between tribal groups, which is fine because that's how we existed traditionally too. But yeah, I don't know, it's tricky because I feel like a lot of museums are also like starting to repatriate artifacts. And so that's difficult for us because we don't have anywhere to put these things. I wish we did. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. I wish I did. I noticed that you had hinted a bit of futures in one of your poems. Can you speak to where your poetry falls in the area of indigenous futurisms, and if it does for you? I would say I do think a lot about the future. I don't know if my work is quite indigenous futurisms because it's not so much sci-fi. I've written some prose that is more indigenous futurisms. I think like during this time of uprising, like it's so important for us to be imagining and, you know, reimagining a better future. And I've been trying to shift my work from like, I guess I would say like examining and like moving through trauma to like imagining a better future. And that's like been something that's been on my mind so much lately. Like, how can I imagine like a Los Angeles that is better for everyone who lives here, like not just my community, but like everyone. I don't know if that answers your question. I think it's definitely something that my work's moving toward. You mentioned Baiona wetlands. Do you have much knowledge and interest in the area? Yeah, I mean, that's like the village site where my family is from. So I do have a connection to that area. Are there ways that you play with / interact with your language to get to know it other than writing poetry, like talking to others or yourself or singing or anything else? Yeah, I did this silly thing where I like came up with all these phrases to say to my dogs that makes me sound like I don't talk to any people ever. I do talk to people, but like I'm around my dogs like hours and hours a day. They haven't learned anything so far, but the thing that's like tough for us is like there just aren't that many people that are learning the language, and then there's just not that many people to talk to on a regular basis. I think I internally like try to bring it into my daily life as much as I can, but like I said, a lot of the language just doesn't fit into today's world. So yeah, it's a challenge. I think we also like, we have songs, and of course, you know, we sing. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Well, I think that wraps up all of our questions, unless anyone wants to put out another question fast before we end off. But I just wanted to say thank you again so much to Megan for kicking off our virtual speaker series. We will have 3 more before December, and then hopefully some more in the new year. We'd love to have you back when we're actually in a environment where we can clap after each poem and actually listen and see you live. But I think it was fantastic to have you do this virtually, and the fact that we're able to reach a broader audience of people is definitely better. So I think that's really helpful. And there's one more question. Quick.
Is there a song you recommend I can teach my 7-day? Yeah, I would say email me and I'll send you a song. I don't want to sing one right now. Yeah, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure, and thank you all for being here. This was so much fun.
Yeah, so we will be signing off. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Be on the lookout if you joined through RSVP via Zoom. We will be adding those people who clicked yes, they want to see more events to our email list, and we will notify you for our next event. Again, we will post all of the info for this talk on our Facebook, as well as I'm going to try to upload it to our YouTube so that we can have it out again. And again, thank you guys so much for joining us. Have a good rest of the night.